Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I too am an Earth optimist. I love the idea. I didn't know it started with ocean optimism, but I salute you and I salute the Smithsonian for putting on this fantastic event. So, technically speaking, we know exactly what we all must do in order to preserve the planet. We need to change what we eat. We need to change the way we manage landscapes. We need to change the way we heat our homes, change the way we cool our offices. There's a lot that we need to change. Conservation's about people. We must change the way we behave in order to preserve and sustain our planet. That we all know. The challenge is how to make that change come about. How do we communicate that? How do we inspire people? One thing's for sure, there's a good reason why companies don't put their engineering departments in charge of product marketing. Imagine if the chemists who created Viagra were in charge of their own marketing campaigns. The ad itself would probably look like a horrible side effect. But then imagine in the hands of a creative, local, can-do conservation organization, an ad to debunk the myth of nature's Viagra, sea turtle eggs. Well, imagine what you could do if you were very creative and you thought very clearly about your target audience and the kind of behavior that you wanted to change. Technically speaking, there are lots of reasons not to eat turtle eggs. They're high in cholesterol, it's illegal, they're really important for ecotourism, and of course, there's really no proof that there's any aphrodisiac qualities whatsoever. So, technically speaking, we know why we shouldn't eat turtle eggs. But speaking technically would never be as good as an ad like this one, produced by Wild Coast. Some of you may have seen this. Translation, my man doesn't need sea turtle eggs because he knows they don't make him more potent. Communication and conservation is critical, but we must even move beyond great communications. We must move to human behavior change. One of the best inspirers of community behavior change I've met in my entire life is this man, Paul Butler. He's one of my best friends. He's an inspiring conservation leader. Many of you already know the story of Paul. It's somewhat legendary now. Working in the late 1970s into the 80s and early 90s in his home island of St. Lucia, Paul was working to save this particularly endangered species, which sat right on the verge of extinction as of the early 1980s. So imperiled was this bird, in fact, that the IUCN and the World Wildlife Fund said this bird cannot escape oblivion by the year 2000. So Paul famously crafted his own local campaign with almost no budget, and his goal was to inspire a sense of civic pride in the environment, to inspire people to feel a sense of identity, cultural heritage, and link that pride to the conservation of this endemic bird. Take pride in St. Lucia. Well, he created a local mascot with this kitschy mascot you see there. He named him Jaco. In fact, they even created a local song. The song, great title for a song, it's the Latin name of the bird, Amazona versicolor. Of course, that's what you would call your pop hit for conservation. 20 years later, I took RARE's board of directors to St. Lucia to see what had actually happened over those years. And in the customs line, a local customs official, this wonderful lady, when asked, said, "Of course I remember that song, man. Amazona versicolor, a Jaco found only in St. Lucia." She had learned that as a school child, potentially in this classroom with Paul many years later. So Paul was able to inspire this sense of pride. Eventually, Jaco got his own tour bus on an island that's only 16 miles wide, and he toured, and eventually this icon became a symbol of national pride. Public referendum landed it on the passport. It is the symbol of St. Lucia, a bird that could have easily gone extinct. Here's what the numbers look like today. There's more than 1,800 St. Lucian parrots in the wild. And without this pride campaign, it's very likely this bird would be extinct. This is one of my favorite bright spots, as we call them. It stood the test of time. We're back again after about 35 years with our board of directors just last month, and the program has stuck. St. Lucia is a different country as a result, thanks to this guy, Paul Butler. Well, the Smithsonian discovered Paul in about 1994 and put this campaign in Belize right on the cover of the magazine. This is about the time I joined RARE. And together, we committed ourselves, Paul and I, to spreading this idea of conservation pride worldwide. And that's really what we've spent a lot of time doing in recent years. Today, there have been more than 350 different pride campaigns in more than 50 countries around the world. Each one of those, a little source, I would say, of Earth optimism. That's a lot of work rolling out 350 campaigns, training 350 Paul Butler clones to roll out those similar approaches. But while we were doing this, two guys much smarter than the two of us were working on an entirely different strategy. Two psychologists, one who won the Nobel Prize, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, were working on changing the way people think about how people think. And in their increasingly famous body of work, they began to identify a number of insights into how humans behave, why we make the decisions that we do, how essentially illogical, irrational, and emotional human beings really are. We're not Homo economicus, we're Homo sapiens. And we know a few things, but we're often confused about just what we know. So we started asking ourselves recently, what if we could harness these behavioral insights for conservation? We're sort of the go-to group for behavior change at the grassroots level in conservation, but even we haven't begun to harness these insights from neuroscience and social psychology and behavioral economics, evolutionary biology. There's so much out there to learn. There's so many new insights that we can tap and bring to the conservation space, bring to all of our peers around the world. So that's precisely what we've begun to do. In order to begin to think about how to teach these insights, we've started off with a researcher at Harvard named Erez Yeli. And with Erez, we've started to model out just a handful of these initial insights to begin to tinker with just how they might apply. So bear with me while I walk you through just a handful of these initial insights. In order to do this, let me introduce you to Roger. Roger is the blue man in the center of the screen. And Roger has to make a decision. Is he going to water this tree, or is he going to cut it down? Let's assume one is a good behavior and one is a bad behavior. And the question for us as conservationists is, how do we increase the likelihood that Roger and all of his friends are going to choose the right behavior, that they're going to behave well? Now, we know that nobody makes a decision in a vacuum. Roger has friends. Roger has associates. Roger lives in a society. And there are a number of insights based on the fact that Roger's likely to make a decision based on how he thinks his friends, or those from whom he seeks approbation, are going to respond. How are they going to judge his decision? That's what society is essentially about in our human interactions every day. So 5 quick insights. One of them is, if nobody can see what decision Roger eventually makes, well then all that reputational risk doesn't come into play. And it's less than likely that Roger's going to do the right thing. So it's really important to make behaviors observable. Just begin to imagine the many applications of just that one idea, whether they be technological or otherwise. But make behaviors observable. That's really key. A second insight has to do with the fact that if no one knows there's a right way or a wrong way, if there's no norm, well, then it's less than likely that Roger's going to do the right thing. What's about the most important thing conservationists can do is establish a conservation ethic, establish a norm around behaviors that will make this planet more sustainable. So it's important to establish norms. But it's really important to make sure that everybody knows there, in fact, is a norm. So you can't just expect people to behave in a particular way. We need to be thinking about how to make those norms commonly held. Shared beliefs are really powerful, especially if we know we share them. A fourth insight has to do with just the nature of the behavior we're trying to change. Binary behaviors, yes, no, on, off. More explicit behaviors, more explicit requests are much more effective than, for example, eat more vegetables, use less gas, turn down the thermostat. It's so much more powerful to be explicit. Don't eat red meat. Do get 35 miles to the gallon. Set your thermostat at X. Those are far easier behaviors for us to adopt. Lastly, and there are many, many, many of these insights that we can all tap into, but just to round out this first handful, it's really important to make these behaviors easy. People generally like to do things that are easy, and they will go out of their way to avoid things that are difficult. All super common knowledge, really basic insights. But we've only been at this a little while. We're just beginning to scratch the surface. But we are committed to building a global network of conservationists, behavioral economists, social psychologists to begin to bring together the best of these insights and to share them with conservationists the world over. That's precisely our plan. If we want to create a sustainable planet, we also need to change the behavior of conservationists. And I think in many ways that's what this Earth Optimism Summit is about. We need to do two things. First, we need to spend a lot more time in conservation thinking about the fact that at the end of the day, conservation is about people, and we need to become agents of human behavior change. We need to study the light arts of human behavior change. And second, we need to spend a lot more time looking outside of our organizations, outside of our countries, looking outside ourselves to find what's already working out there. So let me give you an example of how these two factors come into play. With the example of our good friend Kathy DeMesa from Tinenbach. Kathy is a local conservationist. She was born and bred in the village of Tinenbach on the coast of the Philippines. And as many of you know, the Philippines has a major challenge with overfishing. It has become a national concern. For Kathy, it's also personal. Her father's a fisherman. Her grandfather was a fisherman. Her son will likely be a fisherman. So it's not really an option for the community of Tinenbach to lose its coastal fisheries. But it is definitely a possibility. Coastal fisheries around the world have been overexploited for decades. We've seen a multi-generational decline in coastal fish populations. This is a conservation challenge on the verge of becoming a humanitarian crisis. So clearly something needs to be done. In order to figure out how to help Kathy, we looked around the world and asked ourselves, where are the bright spots in reducing coastal overfishing? So to look for bright spots, we actually created an online prize competition. We call it Solution Search. And the idea is to crowdsource those emerging best ideas for reducing overfishing and restoring coastal fisheries in countries like the Philippines. In just 2 months, we received 103 entries from more than 48 countries. And what we learned from those experiences, we brought to an emerging partnership that we were developing at the time with Environmental Defense Fund, University of California, Santa Barbara, and the government of a host of different nations. Those bright spots delivered through pride campaigns in these countries have given us another sense of optimism about the ocean. Right now around the world, there are hundreds of local leaders just like Kathy applying that bundle of insights, using behavior change, inspiring communities to restore, for the first time in decades, their coastal fisheries. Another great source of Earth optimism. So this is what it looks like on the ground. Kathy leveraging these insights, harnessing the force of human behavior change and local pride. First, making behaviors good and bad much more observable. Second, thinking about how to make sure that new norm becomes a norm for all of society. Children, adults, mayors, ministers, people committing themselves publicly to protecting their coastal environment. That's the power of this campaign. And then finally, she's making sure every single person in the community knows exactly the challenge, the opportunity, the solution, and the progress that she's making. Winning the hearts and minds of the people of Tinenbach has led to a sustainable 50% increase in local fish populations just over the last 3 years. This bright spot in the Philippines has now been replicated. It's now being adopted by 90 coastal municipalities and counting. And thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies, this particular approach, in partnership with Oceana and Encourage Capital and the governments of several other countries, is starting to spread. A virtuous virus of coastal fishery recovery and proud local communities conserving nature. We're extremely proud of Kathy. But the final question is, how are we going to be able to harness these insights and bring them to bear in the many countries around the world, the tens of thousands of communities that need similar assistance? And so we're committing ourselves over the next year to launching a global alliance of conservationists, behavioral economists, universities, social psychologists, neuroscientists, to begin to organize, share, distribute these behavioral insights for conservation. So the opportunity for those of you who are here today is, if you're interested, feel free to join. We'd love to have you involved in this process, this exploration, so that we can figure out how to bring these behavioral insights to the rest of the world. If you're interested, visit our website, rare.org. If you want to become part of the movement, if you'd like to really be involved, send an email to behaviorlab@rare.org, and you'll be signing up to receive updates on the new emerging insights coming from these fields that you can apply to your own work. Thank you to Smithsonian, and thanks very much for listening.